The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March of 1968, and Clem Dossett read it twice standing at the mailbox in the cold. He was 44 years old, had worked 19 acres of cropland outside Decatur County, Tennessee since 1949. The land sat on a gentle rise above a bottomland hollow that flooded every spring, drained poorly, and grew nothing but cattails and mud. The county extension office had sent someone out in 1961 to survey it. The man had walked the hollow edge for 20 minutes, written 4 lines in a notebook, and told Clem the bottomland was unworkable. Saturated clay subsoil, he said, permanent seasonal flooding, advised against any investment. The letter in March of 1968 was not from the extension office. It was from the county tax assessor's office. It informed Clem that the 40-acre bottomland parcel attached to his property, the swamp, as everyone in Parsons called it, would be assessed at $11 per acre for the coming tax year, total annual levy, $440. He owed taxes on land nobody had ever grown a single row of corn on. His neighbor, Robbie Fugate, heard about it at the Farmers Co-op that Thursday. Fugate farmed 90 acres of tillable ground 2 roads over and had never once looked at the hollow with anything but dismissal. He told the men at the co-op that Clem was paying for a pond he didn't need and couldn't drain. Word spread the way it does in a small county. By the following Saturday, most of the men Clem knew had an opinion about it, and none of those opinions were favorable. Clem heard all of it secondhand. He didn't go to the co-op that week. He walked his fence line instead, spent 2 afternoons in late March moving along the edge of the hollow, looking at the ground the way a man looks at a thing he's been told is broken, beyond fixing. The water table sat 8 inches below the surface in the wet months. The cattails grew in patches 12 feet tall. The soil beneath the standing water was dark, almost black in places, and when Clem pressed his boot into the soft edge, his foot sank 4 inches before hitting resistance. He dug a hole with a post digger near the north edge of the hollow, went down 18 inches. The profile was consistent, 6 inches of heavy clay on top, then a gray-blue mottled layer below it that the water had saturated for years. The clay was the problem. It didn't drain, never had. Clem stood there for a while with the post digger in his hand. Then he walked back to the house and looked at what he'd inherited from his father's shelves. Clem Dossett's father, Walter, had farmed the same ground starting in 1921. He had kept every publication he'd ever received from the University of Tennessee Agricultural College, every pamphlet from the county soil conservation office, every circular the state sent out during the New Deal years about land reclamation. The shelf in the back bedroom held 31 years of printed material, organized by year in manila envelopes. Clem was not looking for anything specific. He'd read most of the shelf over the years. But he started again from the earliest envelopes, going through papers his father had marked in pencil and papers he hadn't touched. He found what he was looking for in a 1934 soil drainage circular from the Tennessee Valley Authority. It described a method called French drain construction using organic fill, specifically tight bundled straw packed into hand-dug trenches and covered with topsoil. The concept was not complicated. A trench cut at a slight grade carries water downhill by gravity. Organic fill creates a permeable channel for that water to move through. The straw bundles compress slightly over time, but remain porous enough to conduct water laterally away from saturated ground. The circular estimated a labor cost of $2 per foot in 1934 wages. No mechanical equipment required. Tools listed: spade, tamping rod, wheelbarrow. Clem put the circular on the kitchen table, looked at it through supper, didn't say much about it. His wife, Norma, asked him what he was reading. He told her he thought he could drain the hollow. She looked at the circular, looked at him, didn't say anything else that night. He started in April of 1968 with a borrowed transit level and a 100-foot steel tape measure. Spent 3 days walking the hollow, driving stakes, recording elevation changes on a yellow legal pad. The ground dropped 2 feet from the north fence to the south ditch line, a grade of roughly 1 foot per 100 feet over the length of the parcel. Shallow, but workable. The plan he drew on graph paper used 7 primary drain runs spaced 80 feet apart, running north to south with a grade, connecting into a single collector trench along the south boundary that daylighted through a culvert under the fence line into the county ditch. Total linear footage of trenches, 2,940 feet. Total straw required, roughly 180 bales at a fill ratio of 1 bale per 16 linear feet of packed trench. He bought the straw from Orville Webb, who ran a small hay operation outside Linden. Orville had last year's wheat straw still in the barn, $1.10 per bale. Clem bought 200 bales, cost him $220. He hauled them in 4 loads with the Ford F-250 he'd bought used in 1965. Robbie Fugate drove past the hollow on the second hauling day, slowed down, kept driving. 3 days later, Clem heard from his brother-in-law that Fugate had said Clem was loading straw into a swamp, which was roughly the equivalent of pouring money into a pond. The brother-in-law didn't add anything to that. Clem didn't respond to it. He started digging on April 22, 1968. First trench on the north boundary. The ground was still wet from the spring melt, which made the digging easier in the upper layer and slower in the clay below. He worked with a long-handled spade and a tile spade, the narrow one, and a tamping bar cut from a 1.25-inch iron pipe. The trench specifications from the TVA circular: 14 inches wide at the top, 8 inches at the bottom, 22 inches deep. He measured every 10 feet with a folding rule to keep the dimensions consistent. The first day, he dug 60 feet. His hands bled a little at the web between thumb and forefinger where the spade handle had worn through. He wrapped them in cotton rag and kept going the next morning. By the end of the first week, Clem had 180 feet of trench opened on the north run. He started laying straw on the 7th day. Bundles 14 inches across, tamped to 10 inches of compression, stacked 2 courses deep before covering with a layer of the excavated clay tamped back down on top. The straw went in dry. He'd stored the bales in the equipment shed to keep them off the ground. They needed to go in dry or they'd rot before the drainage function established. His son, Dennis, helped on the second weekend. Dennis was 17 and worked the farm after school. He didn't ask about the method. He shoveled the clay back over the straw and tamped it with a flat-bottom post while Clem moved down the trench setting the bundles. They worked from 7 in the morning until the light failed, dug and filled 90 feet. By the end of April, they had 310 feet of the first drain run complete. Clem had used 21 bales. He paced the work against the remaining straw and the remaining footage and concluded he needed to keep a pace of at least 80 linear feet per working day to finish before the late summer dry-down period ended and the fall rains started again. He wrote the number on the yellow legal pad, 80 feet, daily. He kept that pace for 11 weeks. The extension agent who had visited in 1961 came back in June of 1968, not to see the drain work. He was doing a routine property survey for the USTA cost share program, and the Dossett parcel was on his route. He walked the hollow with Clem on a Thursday afternoon, saw the drain trenches running north to south across the first 12 acres of the hollow floor and asked what Clem was putting in. Clem explained the TVA circular method, the straw bundles, the grade, the collector trench he'd started along the south boundary. The agent looked at the work for some time. He said straw fill would break down, said the clay would slump back into the channel within 2 years, and the drain function would be gone. He recommended perforated clay tile pipe instead, standard drain tile, 4-inch diameter, as the permanent solution for this type of work. Said the cost share program could fund 40% of the material cost. Clem asked what the clay tile would run per foot installed. The agent said roughly $380 per foot for material alone at current prices, plus labor. Clem thanked him. The agent left his card on the truck hood. At $380 per foot, tiling 2,940 feet of drain run would cost $11,172 in material before labor. The cost share program would cover 469 of that. Clem's share, $6,700 on. He had $100 in the farm account. He had no access to 16-9-3-lers. He kept laying straw. The South Collector Trench reached the culvert point on August 14, 1968. Clem had installed a 12-inch corrugated culvert through the fence line into the county ditch. Used a second-hand culvert he'd bought from a road crew, foreman for $18 and a case of beer. The installation took 1 day. He packed gravel around the inlet end, covered the apron with hay bales to prevent scour, and connected the collector trench fill to the inlet. 3 days later, after a 1.4-inch rain, Clem walked to the culvert outlet at the county ditch and watched. Water was running out of it, clear, not muddy, thin but steady. He stood there for a while. Then he walked back to the north end of the hollow and looked at the ground over the completed drain runs. The standing water that normally pooled there within 24 hours of a rain had not accumulated. The surface was damp, not pooled. He didn't say anything to anyone about it that day. By October of 1968, he had all 7 primary drain runs complete. 2,940 feet of trench, 183 bales of straw used. Total material cost, $201 for straw, $200 for the culvert, $14 for rented transit equipment, $9 for fasteners and pipe fittings. $242. The hollow floor was still not farmable. The drain system moved water out, but the surface soil was heavy clay with a structural profile that had never seen a tillage tool. Clem knew he couldn't plant it as it was. He needed to build the topsoil. He started in November of 1968 with what he had. The farm produced 14 cattle. Their winter bedding, straw and manure from the shed, had been composting in a pile at the field edge since 1961. The pile measured roughly 60 feet long, 12 feet wide, and 4 feet high at its center. Clem estimated it at 80 tons. He moved all of it onto the drained hollow floor with the tractor and a spreader, working in 3-foot windrows 40 feet apart. He disced it in on the first dry day in December with the Case 930 tractor he'd bought secondhand in 1963. The disc harrow cut through the surface clay and mixed the compost in to a depth of 6 inches. He left it over winter. By spring of 1969, the drainage was working as designed. The April rains came 3.2 inches in a 10-day stretch, and the hollow floor drained within 48 hours each time. Robbie Fugate drove past twice during that wet stretch. The second time, he slowed all the way down. Clem planted soybeans on 14 acres of the hollow floor in May of 1969. Prepared the seedbed with 2 passes of the disc harrow and 1 pass of spring-tooth field cultivator. The soil had changed over the winter. The compost had opened the clay structure enough that the equipment moved through it cleanly. The seedbed was not good by any standard measure, but it was plantable. He used Harasoy 63 soybean seed, 60 pounds per acre, drilled at 7-inch spacing. Total seeds cost $58.80 per pound. He didn't apply fertilizer. The composted manure he'd turned in provided the nutrient base. The plants emerged on the 8th day after planting. Robbie Fugate heard about the soybean planting at the co-op. He mentioned to the men there that Clem was trying to farm the swamp, and they'd know by August how that worked out. By July, Clem's soybeans on the hollow floor were at 28 inches. The county average for that variety that year was 24 inches. The hollow soil, dark, composted, holding moisture differently than it ever had, was producing a crop that stood visibly taller than the surrounding fields. Clem walked the rows on a Tuesday in July and measured 14 plants at random. Average height, 28.3 inches. The leaves were a darker green than the beans he was growing on the upland acres. He didn't say anything about it that week. In September of 1969, Clem harvested 31.4 bushels per acre from the 14 hollow acres. The county average for soybeans that year was 24 bushels per acre. Clem's hollow ground outproduced the county average by 7.4 bushels. The total harvest from those 14 acres, 496 bushels. At the September price of $240 per bushel gross revenue, $1,055, the hollow had generated more per acre than any field on the farm. He didn't go to the co-op that fall either. The extension agent came back a second time in October of 1969. Not routine this time. The County Farm Bureau had heard about the hollow crop from someone in the area and sent the agent specifically to look at the drainage installation and the yield results. The agent walked the hollow for 45 minutes. He dug a hole at the edge of one of the drain runs with a tile spade he'd brought in his truck. The straw bundles were intact, compressed, darkened, but structurally whole. Water moved freely through the material when he poured a bucketful of ditch water into the trench opening. The agent wrote 7 pages of notes. He asked Clem for the TVA circular he'd used as the source document. Clem gave him a photocopy. He didn't tell Clem he'd been wrong in 1968. Didn't mention the clay tile recommendation. 3 months later, the county extension office published a drainage advisory circular for small, bottomland parcels in Decatur County. The recommended method listed straw bundle fill as an alternative to clay tile for farms without capital access. The advisory cited a 1934 TVA publication as the technical basis. Clem's name appeared nowhere in the circular. He read it once, set it on the shelf next to the TVA publication it had borrowed from. Between 1969 and 1978, Clem expanded the planted acreage in the hollow from 14 acres to 38 acres in increments of 3 to 5 acres per season, pushing the drain system further into the unworked ground each year with additional trench runs as cash allowed. He added 4 drain runs between 1970 and 1973, another 140 linear feet, 91 more bales of straw, total additional cost of $187. The hollow floor's soil profile improved steadily as each year's crop residue and manure applications built organic matter into the former clay. By 1974, the soil on the original 14 acres carried a measured organic matter content of 4.1%. When Clem had first dug the post hole in 1968, The clay profile he'd pulled up had shown no measurable topsoil at all. The hollow had built 6 years of it from scratch. The soybeans averaged 33 bulls per acre across the hollow floor from 1970 to 1978. He rotated corn in alternate years starting in 1972. The corn averaged 94 bushels per acre. The county average for corn that decade, 71 bushels. Robbie Fugate asked Clem about the hollow during a fence repair they did together in the fall of 1975. Didn't ask directly. He asked what variety of soybean Clem was running because his upland beans hadn't performed the way he'd expected. Clem told him the variety, told him the seeding rate, told him about the soil organic matter readings. Fugate didn't mention the straw drains or the swamp comments from 1968. Didn't need to. Both men knew. The test that Clem hadn't planned for came in the summer of 1977. The drought that year ran from the 3rd week of June through the 1st week of September. 11 weeks without significant rainfall across most of western Tennessee. The county recorded 0.8 inches of measurable precipitation for the entire period. The soil moisture deficit for crops in the area reached critical levels by mid-July. Fugate lost 60% of his corn. The county as a whole reported an average corn yield of 41 bushels, 30 below the previous decade's average. Clem's hollow corn in 1977 yielded 78 bushels per acre. The hollow soil, 6 inches deeper in organic matter than the surrounding clay ground, structured by a decade of tillage and biological activity, and still carrying residual moisture from the spring water table the drain system had, managed rather than eliminated, held water longer than any conventional field in the area. The county agent visited in September, after harvest. He stood at the field edge for a long time. Clem offered him coffee. The agent came in. They sat at the kitchen table for an hour. The agent asked detailed questions about the drain installation, the compost application sequence, the tillage depth. He took notes on the same kind of legal pad Clem had used in 1968. He said Clem had managed to turn a liability into what was functionally the most drought-resilient ground in Decatur County. Said it without any particular ceremony. Clem poured him a second cup and didn't say anything for a while. In 1979, the University of Tennessee Agricultural Extension Program published a case study on small farm bottomland reclamation. It described a Decatur County operation that had converted 40 acres of chronically flooded bottomland into high-productivity cropland using low-cost drainage techniques and systematic soil building over an 11-year period. The case study cited yield comparisons between the reclaimed ground and county averages, the soil organic matter progression, and the drought performance data from 1977. Clem received a copy in the mail. His name was in it, 3 times. He read it at the kitchen table, set it on the shelf. The following spring, 6 farmers from Decatur County and 2 from neighboring Perry County drove out to look at the hollow. They came separately, in 1s and 2s, on weekday afternoons when the spring work allowed. Each one walked the field edge, asked questions, looked at the drained trench heads that were still visible at the north fence line. Most of them had bottomland parcels of their own that flooded seasonally and sat idle. Clem answered every question they had, showed them the TVA circular, showed them the cost figures kept on the legal pad from 1968 to 1978. Total drainage installation cost across the whole parcel, $629. Total soil amendment cost over $1144. Grand total investment in the hollow conversion not a $970. The hollow had generated $41,200 in gross crop revenue over that same 11 years. Clem Dossett farmed the Decatur County ground until 1991. He was 67 when he signed the property over to Dennis, who had stayed on the farm. By then, the hollow floor carried 8 inches of developed topsoil across the full 40 acres. The drain system had been functioning without replacement or repair for 23 years. Clem had replaced 2 culvert sections in 1981 and retamped a short section of one trench run where a tractor had backed over it. But the straw fill in every other trench ran as it had been placed in 1968. The agent who had recommended clay tile in 1968 had retired in 1983. The advisory circular his office had published in 1970, the one that hadn't mentioned Clem by name, had been updated twice since then. By 1985, it listed straw bundle drainage as a recommended primary method for seasonal bottomland parcels. Dennis planted the hollow in corn in 2003, harvested 147 bushels per acre. The county average that year was 112. A soil scientist from the UT Extension came out in 2006 to core sample the hollow for a long-term bottomland productivity study. She took 23 cores across the 40 acres. The average organic matter content 6.8%. She told Dennis the soil profile was the most developed bottomland soil she had sampled in western Tennessee. Said it bore no resemblance to the clay profile that would have been present before drainage. Dennis told her his father had started it with straw and a post digger in 1968. She asked if there were records. Dennis went back to the house and came out with a cardboard box. Inside, the yellow legal pad with the trench layout on graph paper, the cost figures, the elevation measurements, the seed purchase receipts from 1969, the 1934 TVA drainage circular, pages soft with handling, a photograph of the hollow from the spring of 1968, taken from the north fence, the kales, the standing water, the flat gray sky over water nobody thought would ever drain. She photocopied everything. The hollow is still farmed today. Different operator now. Dennis sold the property in 2014 to a young couple from Nashville who wanted ground they could work without taking on debt. They had no way to know what they were buying. They found out the first spring. The April rains came heavy that year, 1 inches in 8 days, and every bottomland field in the county was underwater for 2 weeks. Their hollow drained in 36 hours. They stood at the field edge looking at it and didn't understand why it was different. A neighbor told them the story eventually, about the man who'd spent 11 weeks digging 2,940 feet of hand-cut trench, about the straw drains that still ran beneath the field at 22 inches depth, about the 1968 tax bill that started all of it. They went looking for the trench heads at the north fence line and found them still visible. Small square depressions in the soil at the first stake, row 80 feet apart, exactly as Clem had marked them on the graph paper in the spring of 1968. The assessment that said the land was worth $11 per acre. The extension agent who said the straw would rot and the clay would slump. The men at the co-op who said he was loading straw into a pond. None of that is what the ground remembers. The straw is still there. The drains still run. The soil Clem built from clay and patience in Decatur County, Tennessee, is still producing, still working, still exactly where he left it.